All right, we're going to get started in respect of everyone's time. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Alcohol Responsibility Month program focused on navigating parenthood responsibly. My name is Erin Hildreth. I lead the communications team for responsibility.org. And before we get started, and some of you have already heard this, I want to let you know that we are recording this session. A recording link will be sent over to all of our attendees later today, and we ask that you keep this for internal viewing only. Everyone is on mute right now, and if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, which is right next to the chat box. That's just a little bit easier for us to handle. Okay, for those of you less familiar with our organization, Responsibility.org has been working for more than 3 decades towards 3 missions. We aim to eliminate underage drinking, which of course will be a lot of what the conversation is about today. We work to eliminate drunk driving and collaborate with others to eliminate all forms of impaired driving. And we work to empower adults of legal drinking age who choose to drink to do so responsibly. We may touch on that a little bit today as well. And for more than 30 years, along with so many others, we've made great progress on all 3 of these missions. And as you all know, we've not done it alone because we all have a seat at the table of responsibility. With that, I'm actually just going to stop sharing so that we can speak to our guests. April, as you guys know, we've talked about it already, is Alcohol Responsibility Month. And it's a really great opportunity for parents and kids to engage in conversations about alcohol to ultimately prevent underage drinking. We know that when conversations between kids and parents about alcohol increase, underage drinking decreases. And with underage drinking at record low numbers, which we're very, very proud of, these discussions must start early and continue often. So I'm going to yield the floor to Leslie Kimball, who is the Executive Director of Responsibility.org, and Dr. Lisa Damour. Dr. Damour is a clinical psychologist and New York Times bestselling author specializing in teen development and mental health. Of course, she can introduce herself much better than I can. And we are so happy to have everyone here today. So without further ado, Leslie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Erin, for all the work you did to set this up today. I really appreciate it. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Lisa. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you for being here with us. I wanted to first sort of ask you, we talked about the eclipses you were getting on. So I realized that it doesn't have much to do with parenting, although it kind of does, because it sounds like you had a fun party. You want to just tell us about your eclipse day yesterday?
Sure. So of all things, I live in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And so our backyard was basically in the center of the path of totality. I mean, it was just a totally fortunate thing. So we had 4 minutes of totality standing right at our house. So we had some friends over, we did themed foods, and it was super cool. And what I will tell you is you can't capture it in photographs because the photographs all look black and gold, and I have some of those. We got some good pictures, but in reality, the sky turns this like gorgeous sort of purpley gray blue, and the moon is the purpley gray blue, and then there's this white ring around it, and then we could see with the naked eye, you could see the red corona like on the side. So I mean, it was just like ethereal and transporting, and I'm getting goosebumps telling you about it, and I'm not a woo-y person, and I was like, holy moly. And it was interesting because like later it happened at 3:15 was when our totality was, and at about 6 o'clock, 6:30, I was like totally wiped out. And I texted my friend who'd been there. I'm like, are you exhausted? And she was like, yeah. And I just read this morning an article about how like you get this like adrenaline rush in it. And I get that because like the light is changing, the temperature's dropping, like it's all very otherworldly. And adrenaline is a function of the sympathetic nervous system. It activates us. And once there's been a huge drop or like release of adrenaline, the parasympathetic nervous system comes around later to like reset it. And that causes the like, so I was like, what is wrong with me? But now I understand better. So it was super cool. And I don't know that I would travel around the world for it, but if it's in your own backyard, it's a pretty cool thing.
That is awesome. So that was my way of saying, follow Lisa on Instagram. or
If
any
there's
other,
contradictors.
yeah. So I learned, so much from you on social media, but it was fun to see you have that party yesterday and celebrate the eclipse as so many of us did. We didn't get to see the full totality here in DC, but it was still very amazing. And I also noticed that Jennifer Garner likes your tweets. I mean, sorry, likes your Instagrams and so many things. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think she's, it's just cool to see a celebrity liking you as well.
No, it's sort of funny. So she, I don't know her. We have communicated a bit over Insta, so I don't know if that means you know somebody or not. But we have a mutual friend in Lisa Pressman, who's a really excellent developmental psychologist who's based in LA. And Jennifer has been extraordinarily kind about my work. I wrote a book that came out 8 years ago called Untangled about adolescent girls, and heard from Eliza that like Jennifer loved that, and Jennifer has a couple teenage daughters. And then Jennifer was very kind about supporting my most recent book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. There was another book in between those two. And so she just, I like her. I think she's super level-headed, and I think what I hope she likes about my work is that it's I think practical and kind of tested and reality based, and that seems to be, she seems a pretty practical, and like despite all of the glamour of her profession, my sense is she's a pretty grounded human being, and so it means a great deal to me that
Yeah,
she likes the work I do.
which is awesome. And you also have said that teenagers are the great equalizer. So I credit you with that. And I feel like that's very true. So it's
Yeah.
nice to know that even those celebrities out there go through the same thing. And I also have both of those books. I'm just going to repeat them again. Emotional Lives of Teenagers and Untangled are both amazing. So you've helped me immensely. So
Oh, thank you. And then
we'll
there's another
open.
book called Under Pressure, the emotion, confronting the epidemic of stress and anxiety in girls, which they're all 3 New York Times bestsellers. But it's interesting. Under Pressure went into paperback about a week after the pandemic hit, and it's usually when books go into paperback that they gain traction. And then that one sort of just lives quietly.
Oh.
They're all like my children, so if we talk about 2, we gotta talk about 3.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Three awesome books. But so can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into psychology, and what motivates you to work with kids and doing the work that you do?
Oh, so I decided when I was 7 years old that I was going to be a psychologist. I grew up in Denver. I grew up in Colorado. Actually, this is why I have like Western art in my office, because I feel very connected to Colorado. And for a little while, we moved away, and we moved to London. And the same week we moved, I was 6 years old when we moved. A friend of a family friend moved to London from Denver to start studying with Anna Freud, who was Sigmund Freud's daughter and worked out child and adolescent theory. And I spent a lot of time with her when I was a young kid, and we'd had a fair bit of disruption in my family. And I was like totally taken with what she was doing. And I came back to our flat one day and I was like, I'm going to have Carla's job. Like, that's going to be my job.
Wow.
Never changed my mind. I'm still close with Carla. She's in her 70s. I'm in my 50s, right? So it's like a lot of time has passed. Um, and so I love it. I've always wanted to do it. And then teenagers, like, it's a very specialized area in psychology. A lot of people don't particularly like seeing teenagers or anxious about teenagers, and they are tricky. They bring things to therapy that are not always safe or upright. There's complex questions about confidentiality. I mean, like, I get it why people are a little sometimes uneasy about caring for teenagers. I love them. I think they are the most interesting human beings on the planet. I think they get a terrible rap. I think they're so wonderful. Actually, to this point, one of our guests yesterday, so we always celebrate with this one family, 12th grade boy, he got us the gorgeous photos because he had spent all of this time working out the camera and the filter and everything needed to get incredible photos. And he left his timing sheet of the time and what filters would be needed that he had worked out in advance. And I actually texted him, I'm like, do you want this back? He's like, no, I'm done with it. I'm like, okay, this is why teenagers like get a bad rap. Like, this fabulous kid got us these fabulous photos and had spent hours working out the perfect timing. And I'm like, they're the greatest. And they're the greatest. So I mean, he's different from some kids, but he's like not that unusual as far as I'm concerned for a teenager. So I love teenagers. I think that how adults talk about them really matters. I think about how adults interact with them really matters. I think we have tremendous power to shape their behavior. And I worry sometimes that the way we talk about them doesn't always bring out the best in them.
That is fair. And do you feel like the kids are all right? Like, talk to us about sort of the state of teens and kids in America today.
Generally, I'd say like way better than people talk about them being. And I
Okay,
should
good.
also add, I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. So like I am like living adolescence from both ends right now. So the mental health stuff is real. The pandemic was terrible for teenagers, full stop, like just horrible for them. Things weren't looking great before the pandemic in terms of broad trends. And then, the pandemic comes along and teenagers have two jobs, which is to be as independent as possible and to spend as much time with their friends as possible. And the pandemic undermined both of those jobs, and they were very sad, and they had every right to be. So we have seen a rise in distress in teenagers. A lot of kids are back on track post-pandemic. Not everybody is back on track. We are seeing lingering avoidance as a way to manage anxiety. We are seeing lingering eating disordered behavior. So we're seeing some things. So I don't want to minimize that there's suffering and it's real. At the same time, we are raising, and this was mentioned, the best behaved generation of teenagers on record. They are so much better than we ever were. They drink less, they smoke less, they have less sex, they wear their seatbelts, they wear their helmets. I mean, like, things have come a long way. Supervision matters. We supervise them better than certainly growing up in the 80s. We were supervised. And I know there's a lot of anxieties about social media. I know there's a lot in the media right now about social media. I will tell you, it's murky. It's not a clear-cut situation. I think there's kids for whom social media is not a good idea. I think for a lot of kids, they handle it well, and manage complex things ably. But I think teenagers live up to expectations and they live down to them. And if we talk about teenagers like they're broken or fragile or dangerous, we're more likely to get that from them. If we talk about them as capable and resilient and deeply thoughtful, they'll bring that side of themselves to us.
And can you talk more directly about how parents should sort of talk to their own kids about those? Is it a rise to the occasion
Yeah.
expectation for them?
So I think that the thing I really organize my approach to teenagers around, because I'm in my practice, I take care of teens. I know they're not always easy. Like I'm not like I don't have a naive view of adolescence. Um, I live and die by the idea that teenagers, every one of them has two sides. They have their provocative, challenging, naughty, impulsive, indulgent side. And they have their thoughtful, broad-minded, considerate, philosophical, safety-oriented, caring side. And the side you talk to is the side you're going to get. And so the challenge as the adult in response to a teenager is that sometimes kids start provocative. Like there's no question that teenagers will be like, what would you do if you caught me drunk? Right. And they'll ask it like that. What would you do? Right. And so that is their provocative, saucy, let's call it saucy side talking. It's really hard to not speak to that side and not be like, if I got you drunk, you would be going to military school, or, like whatever. And so the job of the adult is to try to be like, okay, that's the side they're showing me. There's this other side. And to be like, you and I both know, right? That's my favorite. Like, let's bring out the grown-up side. You and I both know that alcohol is not safe at your age. And, you and I can unpack that in great. And me catching you drunk, probably the least of your worries, right? What I would really be concerned about is the way in which your safety would be compromised. Because if you're drunk, you're not with me. And so your safety means more than anything in the whole world. So that's what I would be thinking about, not whether or not I catch you, right? So like, just it's that sort of moving towards this other kind of conversation where you speak to them at a much higher level than maybe their provocative side invites you to.
Yeah, that is fair. And when we've talked before, you did talk so much about how parents should talk about that. I want you to be safe. I love you. Can you give some of the parents, we have kids, we have parents and caregivers. You don't have to be a parent
Yep.
to be on this webinar and care, but can you give us some advice about sort of, provocative or not, regardless of how that conversation starts, sort of what you want every parent or caregiver to say and reiterate to those kids?
Okay, so here's like, I'm a very visual person, like, and I think, okay, so when we think about risk and rules, right? The risks teenagers want to take, the rules adults have for teenagers. What we want to remember is this is about safety. Like, that is like, you just take it all down to safety. Like, we don't want teenagers taking risks because we want teenagers to be safe. We make rules to help keep teenagers safe. And I kind of think if you can't make a safety justification for your rule with a teenager, you probably need to be open to revisiting the rule, right? Because I said so doesn't cut it, right? Like there needs to be a safety reason. And almost always that is actually what underpins it. Like, I don't want you at that wild party because it's not safe. I don't want you driving fast because it's not safe. I don't want you smoking weed because it's not safe. Now, we can get hung up on laws and morals and consequences that are not related to safety. This is a diversion. The laws don't always make sense, right? Like, if I were the queen of everything, weed would not be legal until people were 25, at least because that's what the neurology tells us, right? So like the laws, like legal and safe are not the same thing. Kids also have lots of exposure to age mates who are doing all these things that they're not supposed to do, who never get caught, right? So being like, you're gonna get caught, they're like, no, you're not. Like, so don't go down that road. The moral question, they may be like, those are your morals, they're not my morals, right? So like, I'm not saying those aren't reasons. They're not reasons to work for teenagers, and they're a diversion from, I think, the fundamental question you want to have, which is, are you keeping yourself safe? Is what you're doing safe? And what I love about it, it's neutral, right? It's not like, I mean, it is what it is. And it goes with the kid everywhere they go. Getting caught, my morals, like that's if I show up, right? Safety, if I could never know what's going on, your safety is still the key question. So, Leslie, what I would say is anytime a parent finds themselves suddenly in this, like, okay, we're having the conversation about rules or, risks, or you're asking me a provocative question, or you're telling me about an out of control situation, what I would like for families to imagine, and maybe we should have these in our kitchens, is like a light that like shines up, like a neon light that just says safety. like just picture like safety, like this is the headline. So the kid says, I want to go to this party, I'll be fine, right? And you're like, I know where that party is, I know there will be drinking at this party, whatever. And so I think if the parent then like picks safety, then you say, of course you'll be fine. You being fine and safe is like the bottom line. Let's talk about how we're going to make that happen. How are you going to go to this party where there will be other kids drinking, where you will have access to this stuff, and you be safe? Like, that's all that matters to me, is that you be safe. And so that's where you can do it. And then there's a lot more we can say, and we should say, about like what the rest of that conversation looks like. But all of it, just distill it down to safety. However the conversation begins, it always turns to questions of safety.
Yeah, I love the way you explain this. And then let's say that they did go to the party and they found themselves in an unsafe situation. Can you talk about sort of what the parent should do then?
Okay. So there's the setup, there's the end, and the end game. Okay. Here's the one this isn't even bad mouthing teenagers, like, but I also really almost never say anything negative about teenagers. This is a painful reality about teenagers. They are almost quite literally of two minds. And this is very unique to this developmental stage, but they have what we call hot and cold reasoning. So cold reasoning is incredibly logical, excellent reasoning, as good as our reasoning. When your kid is calm, when your kid is not in a charged social situation, they're using cold reasoning. This is why your kid can out-reason you often, right? So, okay, so the kid's like, I'm going to that party, or I want to go to this party, and it's 5 o'clock on a Friday night, and you're standing in your kitchen. And you're like, talk to me about how you're going to be safe. And the kid is like, here's my plan. Okay, cold reasoning is dominating, and they are telling you the God's honest truth. I am not going to drink. I'm gonna, I have no plans to drink. I will be at the party. I will have a good time. I will hold a glass of water. I may even hold a beer, but I won't actually put it to my lips. That's the plan. They mean it. They are telling the truth. If you go, okay, great, have fun, you're not done. You've jumped a step. You send the kid to the party. They get to the party. The kid they have a crush on is there. The kid they have a crush on is like, you're here. And they're like, I'm here. And the kid they have a crush on is like, you want a beer? And they're like, yes. Okay, this is because the hot reasoning system has taken over. The wish to be in a sort of like socially, it would be called peer pressure, but I don't think that really like does justice. Like the wish to be part of the social moment that's happening, the emotional charge of the party, flip the system into this hot reasoning, and then kids do dumb things. Okay, so back to the kitchen. So one thing you have to do is you say that is a fantastic plan. Now let's actually make a game plan for if this becomes hard to do. And so under cold conditions, you actually have to have the conversation about the hot conditions. So you say, great, okay, but what if you get to the party and a kid you like is like, hey, have a beer, and you want one? Just name it, and you want one. What's the plan then? Right? So you get them thinking, like you're in the hot condition, what's the plan then? This can go lots of ways. They might say, well, why don't I drive? Right? And then I can, have a reason I can't, I'm driving. I'll tell them I'm in season. I will tell them that you guys breathalyze me, in my sleep, even though you probably don't do that. But they need an out. Now, I know some people take issue with this. I have no issue with this. They need a face-saving out. I do not think, given everything we know about teenagers, it is reasonable to expect a teenager to be like, listen, we're underage. It's just not realistic. So I think they need something to blame their good behavior on. I have zero problem with this. All I care is about safety. So you can say to them, tell them you're on some medication, tell them we have a family history of alcoholism, tell them whatever you need to tell them. I will back you all the way. You can make it up. It doesn't have to be honest, right? But this will not 100% guarantee that your kid's going to do the right thing in the moment. But what you're preventing is that they're trying to come up with something in the heat of the hot cognition moment. They're not going to do as good a job. Whereas if you sort of had a rehearsal, a cold cognition rehearsal for the hot cognition moment, the chance that they make the right choice goes way, way up. Okay, there's one more thing to say before that kid leaves your house. And again, people will be like, this is a mixed message. I'm like, I don't care. It's about safety. Good kids make bad decisions. They do. It's the nature of being a teenager. Your feelings are big. Your brakes can get weak. I think it is important to say, and I have said to my own kids, I don't want you drinking at that party because I don't think it's safe. Right? You don't know who's there. You don't I don't think it's a safe thing. Our expectation is that you don't drink. And we actually have data showing that adults clearly articulating their expectations changes teenage behavior, right? So our expectation is that you don't drink. And if you find yourself in a jam, even if you're drunk, you call me. You call me. I am your safety solution. Nothing in the world matters more than you being safe. I will never make you sorry that you asked for my help. I think that those are words everyone should say to their kids. And then you can say, we may end up in a conversation in the morning about what happened, but I will never make you sorry that you asked for my help. And here's why we have to do this. I have cared for teenagers who, they get to these parties. These are not organized events. There's no RSVP list. It goes sideways. Good kids find themselves in situations that go sideways. And I've cared for kids who are in a situation and they're like, uh-oh. And then they're doing the calculation we never want a kid making, which is, what's safer, writing this out or calling my folks? You never want a kid to be like, I'm gonna write it out, right? Because calling them is too scary. So that's where I've gotten to 30 years into practicing with teenagers. Does that map? Does that work for you?
Yeah, I love the way you explain it. I mean,
Okay.
it's very tricky as a parent. I think I wish we could hear, I'd love to hear from the folks who are on the chat. And also would love to know if they have questions as well. We can see them, they can drop them into the question and answer. I think we're going to have time for that. But I do love the way you explain it. And I love that you prioritize, safety as well. It's everything. I mean, we're here to talk about underage drinking, but it goes with all risky behaviors too, obviously. So, and do you ever hear people comparing the two, like comparing risky behaviors of which is safer or which isn't? Could you talk to us a little bit about that too?
I think parents are sort of like always like working with that kind of edge. And here's the thing that's really challenging, Leslie. Like teenagers are supposed to do risky things.
Mhm.
Teenagers are supposed to push against that edge. And it's so funny while we were having this backyard party, my friend, she's like, oh, her son showed her a photo and then she showed me. And it was a bunch of his friends were on a bridge and they were kind of hanging their legs off of it. And the mom was like, ah, you know, and I was like, oh, you know, that's teenagers, right? I mean, and so I think I'm always really glad when kids are in an environment where they can do risky things because they are built for it. They are neurologically built for it. And the risky things are like skateboarding. Or I grew up in, as I mentioned, in Colorado, we were skiing and we were skiing in a kind of rough and ready way. And it was thrilling and edge pushing and entirely surrounded by adults and sober, right? Like, so what I worry about as we've become protective of kids is that we've maybe lost a middle where they are walking over to a friend's house, you know, or riding their bike on their own, you know, those kinds of things that have a little bit of a thrill of novelty and, you know, feel like not entirely in the bosom of the family. Um, I'm interested in ways that we can gratify kids' needs for novelty and risk taking that are tolerable for parents, and I think that that's the challenge, right? Like it's not always going to be comfortable for the parent, and so then the question is like, what can we tolerate so that they then don't, you know, hopefully have to do things that feel like actually potentially quite dangerous.
Yeah, and push the envelope in
Yeah.
other ways. And what about anxiety? So do you think that kids are just more anxious today, like you spoke about earlier? Parents are more anxious today, or everyone's just anxious and reacting to everyone else's anxiety? Can you talk a little bit about that and what you see?
Okay. So this has been a really interesting trend, right? I mean, this has been something. So I got my PhD in 97. So I've sort of been watching the world of how people talk and think about feelings change over a really long time. Um, Prior to the pandemic, we started to see a shift in the discourse around anxiety. And it's why I wrote that middle book, Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. Um, because people started to talk about anxiety like it was always a bad thing, like it was always a negative. And that is not the view from psychology at all. Um, and it wasn't always the way people, the broad culture talked about it. And I remember like 15 years ago being like, what's going on here? Like suddenly everybody's complaining about anxiety. Okay, so let me level set on how we do think about anxiety. And then I think the pandemic had real effects on this. Like, I think that that's, you know, so the way psychologists see anxiety is that there can be healthy or unhealthy anxiety. So healthy anxiety is actually this inbuilt system that like keeps us safe, right? I mean, like that's the job, right? So if you're like, you know, if you're riding your bike and then suddenly you can see there's a huge patch of ice in front of you, like you should have some anxiety. Like that'll help you be like steer around it, right? If you walk into a party and you think it's going to be this quiet little get together and it's like a rager and there's a surge of anxiety, like that's anxiety being like, this is not actually safe. So the discomfort of anxiety is designed to actually get our attention and help us make a change for the better, a change towards safety. The only time we consider anxiety to be unhealthy is if it shows up for no reason, right? We want it to be what I would call threat responsive. Like anxiety should show up in the face of a threat. It's there to keep us safe. It feels bad, but if it felt good, we would ignore it. So it should be threat responsive. So some people suffer from anxiety disorders where they're like, I'm in the safety of my home. It's Sunday morning. There's nothing left to do. And I'm still, okay. That's not okay. So either it shows up for no reason or it's way out of proportion to what's wrong. So, like if a kid has a test and they haven't studied, they should be anxious. A panic attack is not going to help them, right? It's going to overwhelm them. It's going to paralyze them. But if it's responsive to a situation and proportional to the events, this is a good thing. And so that's how we've always understood it. And that message was getting lost. All anxiety was being pathologized. And this is a little bit the fault of psychology because we use the term anxiety to talk about everyday anxiety and anxiety disorders to talk about the disorders. Whereas we do a better job. We have like sadness and depression, right? The two different words help us to make the distinction between what can look like similar experiences, whereas anxiety, we've messed it up with one word. Okay, so that was the landscape pre-pandemic. Okay, then the pandemic comes around and totally rocks our worlds. And I think that is, I'm not sure any of us have fully integrated what the pandemic did to our experience of the world. This sense of like, you could be living one way one day and then like 12 hours later, your life is forever changed and everybody around. I mean, like it's, I think, almost impossible to integrate.
Right.
And then a lot more use of avoidance to manage anxiety, because that's how we have managed anxieties through the pandemics, and that has stayed around. And then, of course, we have endless access to the news. The news is often kind of lousy. We have gun questions, we have climate questions, we have an incredibly ugly political environment that we're in. So like when we look at the data, and the American Psychological Association does a good job of collecting these data, like people are more anxious, like because there's like more stuff that is going on, and we're also highly, highly aware of it.
Yeah, it's and do you think that do you see that, and it sounds like there are underage drinking for one is decreasing by quite a bit. We're thrilled about that. But what do you see that, how do you see that people are coping with that anxiety?
I think withdrawal.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of just not engaging.
just opting out of doing things. Yeah.
And the problem is, avoidance is a very effective short-term solution to anxiety. If you avoid the things you're frightened of, you feel way better. Like, oh, I'm anxious about that party, I just won't go, or I'm anxious about school, I just won't go. But avoidance actually feeds anxiety over time. When we avoid things, they stay scary in our mind. We know how good it feels to not engage. We don't have competing information that it's actually okay. And so avoidance actually has this kind of cascading sort of snowballing effect. And the one statistic that's finally getting some attention is that school avoidance is twice what it was, or school absenteeism is twice what it was before the pandemic still. Like a lot of kids just don't go. And that's a
yeah,
issue. Massive.
it's worrisome. Yeah, it's worrisome. We do have a few questions if you're willing to take them. What do you say if a child notices someone who hasn't consumed in moderation or has overconsumed, as we'd put it, at a family event, or if a child notices somebody acting differently after they've been drinking or perhaps doing some other substance?
Okay, so child's a big age range. But I think presuming everyone's safe enough, right? And I can see that those situations could be managed in a way to keep everybody safe. I think if the child's like, what's up with Uncle Jim? Like, what are you being so weird or so silly? I think that that's actually a really great time to say, yeah, he drank too much. And this is the thing about alcohol, it impairs judgment. And so Uncle Jim was doing or saying things that if he were sober, he would not have done or said. This is why we don't drink too much. Right? I mean, I think like, just take it head on.
So you think it's completely fine to age appropriately, just address it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kid and depends on the age, but you know, I think that can be treated as a gift. And again, like there's two things that are happening in how I responded. Like there's the lyrics and there's the tune. Right. So the lyrics are like very direct, right? He drank too much, drinking too much impairs judgment. He did or said things he probably wouldn't have done, or he may be sorry he did or said, right? But like, this is in private. The kid saw it, right? Like, you're not outing Uncle Jim. The kid's like, what was that, right? Um, but the tone is kind. The tone is matter of fact. The tone is neutral. The same thing could be said in a way that's kind of nasty, right? I mean, you could be like, well, yeah, he drank too much, right? I mean, like, so it's a two-part communication, and you can really be very direct with kids and very honest with kids, but in a way that is contained and is measured and is fair to all parties. But you got to control your tone to do the second part of that.
That's fair. All right, this next question is in early childhood, so before the teenage years, how do you talk about alcohol moderation with kids?
So I think here the best advice comes from the inside of a Dove chocolate wrapper I once encountered, which was, don't talk about it, be about it. They're watching. They're watching, 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 right? And so, if you are saying moderation's important and then you're drinking too much in front of them, like you're actually making it worse. Like you're better off saying nothing, right? So I would have it very much be that you are modeling healthy relationship with alcohol, right? And this is how we think about it. Like alcohol is a relationship. There's unhealthy and healthy versions of it. So a healthy relationship with alcohol is that it's celebratory or enhancing or, you know, pleasurable and there's no downsides. You're modeling that. You're drinking in moderation. If your kid calls the question of like, "Well, you drink," you can say, "I do," and I do it in a way that is entirely safe. Right? Back to safety. We are at home. I am not driving. I stop before I get to a place where I feel like I would do or say anything I felt uncomfortable about, or I felt my safety or anybody else's would be compromised. Like you can just like detail that, but I would be just very mindful that you're modeling exactly the kind of relationship with alcohol that down the line, if your kid decides as an adult to use alcohol, that they've seen from you how to do it.
Yeah, I love your Dove. Tell me the Dove wrapper again.
Don't talk about it, be about it.
Got it. Don't
I
talk
think that's
about
like
it. Be
most
about
of
it.
parenting
Yeah,
actually is
that is,
don't talk about it, be about it.
it's applicable to a lot of things. And then I will ask you a few more questions, but just for the group, I can't tell if everyone can see all of the questions, but there is one specifically from Diageo. So I don't know the answer to this one, so we'll have to find out this via our Diageo board member for responsibility.org. So I'll handle this one on the side. But I would just say that for the member companies that are listening, it would be useful to sort of reflect on your employee handbook. And I do think that I'm going to plug responsibility.org. We do have a number of programs that help adults talk to kids about underage drinking as young as 5 all the way up through adulthood. So they're all on our website. So in addition to this amazing webinar we're having with you today. So thank you for that. So my last question would be, alcohol or sort of protecting kids and preventing underage drinking is that safety and that love that we give our kids. How do you sort of make kids and people, the adults in our lives, feel happy and seen?
Oh, wow, right? I think there's two ways. One is agendaless presence. I think we don't talk about this. Like we always imagine that there's some interaction or something at work. An extraordinary gift, especially for adolescents, but for other people, it's just like to be with somebody with no agenda, just enjoying their company, interested in them for who they are, talking, not talking, sharing something, not sharing something, but the ability to be present without having some angle or some thing you're trying to accomplish, I think is an extraordinary way of being with the people we care about that matters. And it really matters to teenagers. Like teenagers, adults feel like their teenagers don't want them around. no, your teenagers actually do want you around. Like I hear from that all the time. They don't want so many questions. They don't want so many, like why didn't you? They don't want they don't want us trying to like get them to do something all the time, but they like do like us. It's funny. Uh, we play. We don't. My 13-year-old and I last night got back to something we started doing last summer. We call it playing pickleball, but like we don't have a pickleball court or even a pickleball net. We have a driveway with a line that we have designated as the net. There's no height requirement. But we did order like this like cheap little pickleball set and we just like pop the ball back and forth. We don't pay attention. We don't keep score. It's so fun. It's so
That's so nice.
right. And so like I'm not trying to like now that we're playing pickleball, let me bring up the like we just talk about whatever, right? And like
Right.
that's so fun. So that's one thing. The other thing that makes a huge difference in connecting, and this is true all ages, is when people bring us their upset feelings, right? Kid, teenager, partner. If you just start with empathy, if you just say, oh man, that stinks, or I'm sorry, or of course you're upset, often that's all people want. And it's really rare, actually, that people just get pure, no advice empathy. So either be present without an agenda or be very empathic. That's how you connect with
That's
people.
amazing. That's
It's
very
actually
good
not
advice
that hard.
for everyone. Yes. I love that. Another question has come in. Kristen from Bacardi. At what age do you start the conversations about alcohol? And how do they change as they're younger versus older? And yeah, that's the question.
So, what I would say, okay, I'm so glad these are like perfect, like fantastic. Like this is such important stuff to cover. The conversations about risk-related behavior that you have with your teenagers are going to be much more successful if your kid started them. So rather than be like, you're 12, it's time for us to have this conversation, though you may have to do that. What I would instead say is have a listening ear for your kid to put this on the table. Now, here are the ways that they do it, and you have to keep a close eye because sometimes they're like, how old were you when you first drank? Right? So like they'll ask a question like that. Or very common, they'll be like, you'll have an 8th or 9th grader who's like, I heard there was drinking at a party this weekend. Right? Like that is, I would say, overwhelmingly the most likely way it's going to come up is they're going to talk about other kids and what other kids are doing. This is your moment. Like this is a huge moment because basically the kid is like, I am opening the door to this conversation, right? If you're like, hey, we need to talk about drinking, they're like, whoa, where are you coming from and why and what did I do and how do I get out of this, right? Like that's usually where they're at. Whereas if they're like, yeah, I heard there was a party this weekend and kids were drinking, right? Like that's okay. If you're prepared for this moment and you can keep keep yourself in a good place, if you can say, really, what do you think about that? Now you're having the conversation you want to have. Now, in my experience, kids bring stuff like this up because they are not sure it's okay. I also, in my experience, they bring it up in a kind of casual, flippant way because they don't want to sort of lead the witness, right? Because if they're like, it's terrible, and we're like, yes, it is. They're like, well, is it really? Or because I said. So it's pretty common for me to be like, yeah, I heard there was a party and there was drinking this weekend. And it's easy as an adult to be like, oh, what? Already? It's great. Don't be pulled in. You can be like, what do you think? And usually the kid's like, okay, I'm not, barking up the wrong tree. There is something to this. And then you can get where the kid is at with it. And you can see, and they may say like, it was really surprising, or they feel really young, or like, that's like, or they can be like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a big deal. And you can be like, yeah, I do think it's a big deal. And I'll tell you why, right? It doesn't feel safe. But that's the portal. Okay. If you're like, uh-oh, I blew it. I can imagine I was like, you can recover. You go back to them and say, you know what? I think I had a strong reaction when you mentioned about that party. It probably wasn't helpful to you. Can we do a reset? I care about your safety a lot. That got the better of me. What were you thinking? Tell me what you think about that party. Like you can usually recover. So I would like hope by 7th, 8th grade or so, like, unfortunately, you're probably going to start to hear about it if you've got a working relationship with your kid, but not necessarily. So if by 8th and 9th, and you think your kid has any contact with it, like they're going to parties, also know your kid, right? If you're like, my kid's playing Dungeons and Dragons and like that's it, you don't have to bring it up, right? I mean, like, you get to know your kid. But if you're like, they're going to be at a party where there's drinking, then have to say, listen, I want to have a conversation about drinking. This isn't about anything you've done or, are going to do, but it's important for us to have this conversation. Okay, so let's say your kid's 9th grade and they're like, 100%, yep, I think it is the devil's liquid. I'm not touching it. I'm nowhere near it. And you go, great, and cold, hot. And they're like, yep, I got my hot plan. I'm all good to go. And you're like, great. Now, you have to keep coming back to it because I have cared for 9th graders. I cared for a teenager, a 13-year-old who was so against alcohol, she would not have any at her bat mitzvah, not even for the adults, who a few years later was drinking plenty on the weekends. So if her parents were like, box checked, like this, no, they change a lot. So keep checking in, keep having the conversation. Kids change over time.
That's great. All right, this really is the last question due to time.
Okay.
But I loved your point about the conversation goes better if they bring it up. So I'm going to remind that, just reiterate that. So Anna from Diageo is thanking you, obviously. What role do trusted adults play in these conversations? If, sort of trusted adults versus parents, sometimes that messenger is just is that messenger just as important or more important than the message?
Yes. Okay, so first of all of us care for teenagers. Whether you have teenagers or not, all of us care for teenagers. The single most powerful force for adolescent mental health is strong relationships with caring adults. It's great if it's your folks, it's not always your folks, or it's not only your folks. So those of you who are aunts and uncles can probably do more good if you sense that your nieces or nephews are getting a little wild to be like, you know what, honey, I love you. And your safety means more to me than anything in the whole world. And my sense is you're not taking great care of yourself. What's getting in the way? Right? Like that conversation from a loving non-parent is an extraordinarily powerful thing and can save lives. I mean, it's huge. Also of value are older teenagers. If you want to know who 7th or 8th graders take their cues from, it's 11th or 12th graders. So to the degree that there are wonderful cousins, babysitters, neighbors around, I would say on all behavior of concern, getting a level-headed, well-respected, older teenager to say like, you know what, I didn't drink in high school. Didn't feel right to me. But I went to parties. Here's how I managed it. Having that kind of conversation with a kid, like that's gonna do a world of good. Now, I am gonna stand by the fact that it matters what we say to, like, if it's your own kid, it matters what you say. What's really critical is you should expect an eye roll and you should not be offended by it, right? So if you say to your teenager, you know what, just values clarification, no drinking, it's not safe. And your kid goes, oh, I know. Okay, and leaves the house. This was a great outcome, right? Their job is to maintain a sense of independence. If they are going to say something like, what are we looking for? Like them to say like, I'm really appreciated that you reminded me. Yes, I understand the family values. Like no teenager's going to say that, right? I'd be like, oh, that kid's up to something. And now you got an issue. For them to be like, oh, I know, is I heard you and I need to maintain a sense of independence, but they don't have to take it as like hugely welcome information. In my own house, when my girls roll their eyes, I'm like, oh, that means they heard me. Okay, we're good. So it can come from the outside, it can come from you. You're going to get different reactions. It still needs to be said.
That's fair. Thank you. Any last things that you feel like we should know? Like you obviously talk to teenagers directly, without the parents there. Obviously, anything that you think we should just know really quick as we sort of wrap up. Anything you want parents out there to understand that maybe we don't now?
Teenagers want to do the right thing. And teenagers care about their own safety and they care about their friends' safety a lot. And I sort of tucked it in, but I actually want to pull up the phrase like what gets in the way. That when teenagers are doing things they're not supposed to be doing, I find it way more useful instead of being like, you know what you should be doing, right? Like they're like, of course they know what they should be doing. I usually use the what gets in the way construction. So I will say to teenagers, like, okay, like you all know you're not supposed to drink, right? It's not safe and it's not legal, but it's really not safe. Okay, but teenagers go to the parties all the time and they drink. Like, what gets in the way of them taking care of themselves, right? And unpacking that question of like what gets in the way, and then working with teenagers in partnership on addressing the barriers to doing the right thing. I can't 100% guarantee a kid's safety, but I will tell you this. I can measure a kid's safety in terms of their proximity to adults. And teenagers having a conversation with an adult saying like, okay, what gets in the way of kids keeping themselves safe at parties? And the kid's like, well, there's this and there's this. And the adult's like, well, what do you want to do about this? And how can I help with that? Like this, they're like this, that kid is safer. Whereas the adult who's like, don't let me catch you drinking. If I catch you, it's military school. Now you're looking at this. That kid is not as safe. So always think like we can talk to them in ways that do this. We can talk to them in ways that do that. Talking to them in ways that do this, I think goes a long way towards safety.
Got it. That's great advice. We are so grateful for your time today. Thank you for taking time to talk to all of our member companies, especially. And we remain huge fans. So we will buy your books and follow you on social and continue to send you all the kudos for your great, great work to make us all better parents and to keep our kids safe. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Erin, any last reminders for us?
You all will receive an email shortly with a recording of this amazing talk. Of course, you're always welcome to ask us some questions. We can follow up with Dr. Damour, or we can follow up with Leslie with some resources from responsibility.org. But again, Dr. Damour, thank you so much for your time and your words. I wrote down so much as a parent myself. And Leslie, of course, thanks for some great questions, and everyone who attended, also thank you for your amazing questions, your time and attention, and have a very safe Alcohol Responsibility Month. Thanks, everybody.